Section 10.8 deals with complex numbers. Complex numbers are really just square roots of negatives. And so if we have the square root of -2, your calculator is going to give you an error message for that. Square roots of positives we can simplify, like the square root of 4 equals 2, but the square root of -4 would be an error. Now, mathematicians have allowed us, though, to simplify these square roots of negatives. What we do is we simplify the numerical part, the 4, and then we say that it's imaginary, so they just write it as 2i, meaning that it's an imaginary number. Now we have then a definition that says that I is the square root of -1. So up above where I had the square root of -4, here's really what's going on. We can write the square root of -4 as the square root of -1 times 4. So I'm just splitting it up as a product of two values. Then we've also learned that we can split the product up as the square root of -1 times the square root of 4. Now the square root of 4 is 2, and we define the square root of -1 to always be an I. So when we put that product together, we get the 2i. So then it would follow, for instance, that the square root of -16 would be 4i. Now what you see below this definition is some of the powers of I. And so we start by saying that I to the first power, that's the square root of -1. Well, we just say that that's an I. What happens if we square it? What's I squared? Well, if we take the definition, it's I squared is I times I, which is -1 times the square root of, or square root of -1 times itself. And so the square root of -1 times the square root of -1 is -1. And so we have I squared as -1. I cubed. This can be rewritten as I times I squared. And so we've already defined above that I squared is -1, so we're doing I times -1, which equals -I. I to the fourth power, we can split that up as an I squared times an I squared. That's not the only way to do it, but this is really helpful. I squared is -1 times -1, so we get +1. So we have this list of values, I, -1, -I1. Now, why does it stop here? You know, because you could keep going. So let's go ahead and keep going with the powers of I. So I'm going to do this off to the side. Let's look at I to the fifth power. I can represent this as I to the fourth times I. So we look back and I to the fourth is 1. So it's just equal to I. I to the sixth power, I can break that down as I to the fourth times I squared. So that would be 1 times -1. So I get -1 for I to the sixth. I to the seventh, we can say that's I to the fourth times I cubed. And so I to the fourth is 1, I cubed is -I, so we get -I. I to the eighth power, I to the fourth times I to the fourth, or 1 times 1 is 1. So what you'll see is when I keep going, I get the same cycle of values. I get I, -1, -I, and 1. So without doing any work, we could say that I to the ninth would be back at the beginning. It would be I to the 10th would be -1, and then we could continue the pattern. We will talk later about how to simplify higher powers of I, you know, like I to the 100th power. What would that be? So it's always going to be one of these four answers. It's either I, -1, -I, or 1, and so we'll learn later how to simplify the exponents that are higher.